We are hosting this workshop through the Person-Centered Care in Long-Term Care Community of Practice, which is an initiative of the Champlain region. And we're really excited today to be hosting this workshop about engaging caregivers through family councils and talking about the connections between how important it is to support caregivers in long-term care homes. My name is Michelle Fleming, and I am a senior knowledge broker with the Ontario CLRI at Bruyere Health, and it's my pleasure to be just moderating today's session. You will have just heard that we are recording the session today. We will turn off the recording once we get to the question period, just so folks can feel comfortable asking whatever questions you might have, but we are going to record the presentation component just so that folks who missed today's session will be able to view it later. So before we get into the presentation today, I wanted to just give a little bit of detail about the group that is hosting this virtual workshop. So our Person-Centered Care Community of Practice began as a working group back in 2019, and it was initiated originally by the Champlain Dementia Network in a response to the community's interest in learning more about the butterfly model and other philosophies and social models of care, like the Eden Alternative and Greenhouse. And this group has really been a peer network of long-term care homes together with caregiver and care partner representatives, where we discuss various change ideas for how we can advance person-centered care in long-term care. Membership of this group includes a variety of regional and provincial partners, including the Ontario CLRI at Bruyere Health, where I'm based, the Champlain Behaviour Supports of Ontario office, the Champlain Hospice Palliative Care Network, or CHPCP, as well as our contacts at Ontario Health. And all these organizations help support long-term care homes in their culture change activities. And this group started coming together virtually during the COVID pandemic, and we continue to come together virtually bi-monthly. And as a group, we continue to share successes and challenges along the way. And a few years ago, the group decided to realign the structure away from being a working group towards a community of practice. And the way that members benefit from this group is by sharing activities and learnings across homes who are all embarking on culture change journeys. It's a place where we can bring forward specific issues or questions related to the long-term care home's transformation journey and receive some feedback from other members. And we also do things like what we're going to do today, which is host guest speaker sessions where we have expert speakers on topics that are of interest to the group. And if you are interested in joining this group, if you're connected with a long-term care home in the Champlain region, we would welcome you to join us. My colleague Rachel, who's a knowledge broker with the CLRI, will share her email address in the chat. And if you're interested in more information, feel free to reach out to us. So now I will introduce our two guest speakers that are joining us today for this session about how we can really engage better with caregivers through family councils. And so our two guest speakers today that are joining us are Cathleen Edwards, who's an education manager with Family Councils Ontario, and Liane Pelissier. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about each of them, and then I'll turn things over to Cathleen and Liane to kick us off. So Cathleen earned her bachelor's in human kinetics from the University of Windsor. After graduating, she worked on the dementia-specific neighborhood at a long-term care home in North Toronto. While she enjoyed getting to know the residents and families, she went on to pursue her master's in health and physical education at Brock University. Kathleen is an experienced post-secondary instructor facilitating courses in recreation and gerontology. And prior to joining the team at Family Councils Ontario, she worked as a work package coordinator for AgeWell, which is Canada's National Centre for Excellence on Technology and Aging, based out of the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute. Kathleen has joined the team at FCO as the education manager and travels the province providing presentations to support vibrant family councils. And Liane Pelissier is the client services manager with FCO. She is passionate about making a difference and helping others, but most particularly those living, working, and family members in long-term care. Liane has 19 years of experience working in a long-term care home as resident and family services coordinator, helping support residents and families as they transitioned into long-term care. And part of her role was being the staff liaison for the home's family council. Her years of experience helped her to develop great skills in communicating with and supporting families, residents, and staff in long-term care. This lived experience has been a great source of support for the families, family councils, and the staff that reach out to FCO. Liane has a background in social work. She is also PIECES and You First trained. She is a certified gentle persuasive approach coach, and through the years, she has gained knowledge, experience, and training in topics such as palliative care, customer service, and person-centered care. Through her career in long-term care, she has been involved in strategic planning, accreditation, and ministry compliance. And in her personal life, Liane loves spending time with her family, creating memories, and she enjoys listening to music, watching home improvement shows, and providing her husband of 34 years with a lengthy to-do list. And so with that, I will pass it over to our wonderful colleagues from FCO. Over to you, Kathleen and Liane.
Thank you so much. So we're excited to be here now that you've heard a little bit about us. We're here to really talk about engaging family caregivers through family councils. If it will let me move forward. So today we're going to discuss the role of family councils in culture change. We will share some examples of collective advocacy through the voice of family councils for person-centered care, as well as like how that connects to culture change, and then share some discovery of best practices for supporting the move to long-term care for family members and caregivers, which is one of our really exciting new resources at Family Councils Ontario. So I'm sure you're aware of what this means, but I just wanted to make sure we're all starting from the same page when we're talking about culture change. So culture change is really looking at shifting how organizations deliver care to focus on the holistic needs of residents, including their individual interests and experiences. So I like this picture. It's of a very vibrant home. They probably consulted the residents and families about and staff about what colors would they see representing their home, make them feel comfortable, make them feel welcome. Obviously, they wanted something nice and bright because when it's winter and it's not so nice outside, you do want that little pop to make it feel a little bit more tropical, a little bit more welcoming. You'll see there's pictures posted. You can see the floor. It's probably a nice laminate looking hardwood, but it looks very home-like, right? It doesn't look very clinical or space it just looks more welcoming, more like a place where you'd be proud to call it home. So again, culture change is that broad movement focusing on transforming institutions from that clinical to really looking at the individual needs, making it feel more home-like. It emerged in the 1980s. And again, it was a reorientation of the values, beliefs, and norms that were typically used to govern how life worked in long-term care. It is more than a physical transformation. It's also really looking at how staff are able to interact with residents, transformation in their values, in policies, as well as organizational structures. I love the greenhouse model where it really is, those frontline staff who are cross-trained to do whatever the residents need, whether it's recreation, PSW personal care, working in the kitchen with them, doing laundry and cleaning. They do all of that. They aren't restricted by union rules and roles, which can create a lot of fractures when you are working in those positions. It's not one specific model of care. So there's a number of different ways of doing culture change. And again, it is governed by these principles of resident directed care. So again, the resident's voice or their wishes are really what are governing what they do. So if you are not a morning person, my mother is not a morning person. So resident directed to her would mean that she would not be getting up at 6 a.m. She would be getting up maybe at 8 a.m. and they'd have her coffee ready for her in the morning to help her in her normal routine that she has now continue to enjoy and have a meaningful life that reflects her preferred routines. Again, that home-like environment. So vibrant, colorful, really, minimizing the institutional-like, clinical-like environment. Close relationships between staff and residents. So again, really looking at the size of the neighborhood. So it's not mass of 32 people living together. Maybe it's 10 to 12 people who are living where the staff work consistently with them. And again, the staff have the flexibility where the focus isn't on the quantity of what they do, but more the quality of what they do. So they have the time to really have those conversations, to pause, to get to know each other. It's about staff empowerment. So again, Having frontline staff able to make decisions based on what is needed for that resident. So I heard an example of greenhouse homes, and I always go back to them because to me, they really do exemplify the staff empowerment aspect. Um, if they go in to check in on one of their residents in the morning, and normally they get them up, but that resident is just not feeling the day, they won't rush them. They will stop, they'll have a conversation, they'll try and connect with the resident and understand what is going on with that resident to try and help support them getting out of that funk, getting out of that mindset before they move on. Or if they just aren't ready to get out of bed, they adapt, right? They'll come back at a later time. Collaborative decision making. So again, working with the expertise of everyone who is involved and knowledgeable about the resident, including the resident, as well as their family and friends who have those strong relationships and know the preferences and can help advocate for the best quality of life for that resident. And again, quality improvement. So it's looking at what you're doing, you're assessing what you're doing, and you are always trying to look for ways that what you are doing could still be improved to reflect those resident needs, reflect family needs. So it's not just staying with something that works, but it's always looking to how can we do things differently or better? How could we change things so it's really the best experience for everyone who's involved? And some examples of culture change include the Eden Alternative. So, Dr. Bill Thomas and his experience in long term care, looking at the three plagues of loneliness, helplessness, and boredom, and looking at a way to transform that by bringing nature in, by really, again, transforming the institutional like setting to a more home like setting. The butterfly model, which again is looking at how can you bring in items like this beautiful vanity and having that be part of the long-term care home. So things that would be important to residents or might stimulate some important memories for them, make them feel like they are at home, bringing those into the design of the home and incorporating those items in ways that are meaningful to the residents to just engage them. The greenhouse model, so smaller homes that have beautiful wide open spaces, open floor plans, the kitchens in that area, they can access it. Residents and staff sit together and eat at this beautiful long table. They've got access to a porch that's covered, as well as outdoor spaces. Dementiability or Montessori methods, which is bringing in meaningful activities through the built environment for older adults, specifically with dementia. The gentle persuasive approach, behavioral supports teams, resident councils, and lastly, family councils are part of culture change within long term care. So, again, having a group that brings families together, engages families, and helps them use their collective voice to make an impact within the long term care home to advocate for quality of life. Family cultures are part of culture change. So now that I've said family cultures are part of council culture change, if you've never heard about family councils or Family Councils Ontario before, and I'm hoping this isn't the first time you've heard of us, family councils are organized, self led, self determining democratic groups composed of family, friends, and persons of importance to residents in a long term care home. So, what this means is family councils are groups of family and friends of residents who get together and decide as a group what they want to do with their time together. There's a reason why they've decided to show up for that set time and get together. They share that reason with each other. They discuss that reason. And there's different reasons why they might be getting together, but there's some reason, some need for them getting together. Typically, it's because they want to talk about their experiences, they want to learn about the long-term care environment, or they just want to work together to try and make things really effective when it comes to communicating with the home, understanding policies in the home, sharing concerns about things that they might have noticed going on in the home, and saying, hey, what can we do to try and support this issue or this problem? There is different sizes for councils. There's no one best size for a family council. There's no one best structure for a family council. It really is unique to every group because every group and every long-term care home community is unique to the staff, the community, and the residents who are part of that building, who really make it that long-term care home environment. And so the councils will all be unique based on the family and friends who make up the support aspects of that long-term care home community. So, some common characteristics of family councils are that they will come together and interact with each other on a regular basis. They will share a sense of purpose or belonging, specifically that they are a member of that specific community where they are living or connected to that community where the home is located, and have a resident who is either a family member or a lifelong friend who is there and they come in to visit with them. They are present in that home because of someone who's important to them in their lives is living in that home, and they want to do their best to try and support them and having the best quality of life. They will have some type of common goals or objectives, so some shared reason for what they're trying to achieve together and why they want to spend time together. And they'll have some type of structure, so some way of being organized. They'll have some rules about what they expect of each other when they're together, like please don't talk, please don't yell, confidentiality, so what's shared in council stays in council, and then some ways of working that they will discuss as a group and come to an agreement with, and make sure that they share with anyone new who joins in those groups. And again, that structure, those rules, how they work together will change as their council changes. So they are not fixed. Uh, they might be if they're set in stone in the sense of they said, here's our election date, they've agreed to when the elections are set. But other than that, like most councils with their terms of reference, which is what I call them, or another way people refer to them as is bylaws for their councils. They'll check in monthly and just make sure, do these still work and reflect what the group is trying to achieve? And if it doesn't fit, then they'll make those changes to make sure it does reflect what it is that they have going on. So, what are some of the benefits of having a family council in a long term care home community? So, it's an important place where families and friends can go when they have questions. So, there's a lot that you need to learn about when you support someone moving into long term care. This is a really good place for them to go to be able to ask those questions and to get that information. It's a really good forum for education. It's really helpful in improving the relationship between families and staff. So, councils can invite managers from different departments or staff from different departments to come and introduce themselves to families. So, families can put a name to a face and have the chance to learn about those departments, what they do, and just kind of clarify expectations for communication when it is. So if they are asking with the dining room and dietary staff, if I want a special snack or if I want a birthday cake or if I want to do something to celebrate, how would I go about, getting that cake made or having those resources available, so that way I can have a birthday party for mom or dad or my friend at the home and use you to support me doing that rather than having to go out, buy a cake, and then have to bring it in and set it up myself. How can I work with you to make this birthday party happen within the long-term care home? Again, it's a setting for ongoing peer support. So again, as caregivers, it's really challenging to go through the process of what you're going through on your own. Even if you do have siblings or other people who are in that role, it's really tough to bear that weight on your own. And so it's a place where you can kind of go and ask questions and just openly share with others who are also in the same boat as you, in the sense that they are also a caregiver to someone living in long-term care, and specifically that long-term care home. You might get support from someone who has a family member in another long-term care home, but the experiences from home to home are so unique and so different. Having that place with people who are in the same home, in the same role as you, is really important to really have that person you can speak to or just share your experiences with. They may have similar experiences, may be able to give you some ideas or advice about what they have done in a situation to address that concern or how they've managed those emotional aspects of caregiving. It's a forum for education and learning about long-term care. So again, just understanding, what does a dietitian do? What role do they have in making the menu? How are the menus made? Understanding the Fixing Long-Term Care Act, understanding anything you want to know about long-term care. It's a place where you could have education about that, or work with external organizations like the Alzheimer's Society, have a speaker come in and share a little bit about the progression of dementia or strategies for communicating with someone with very advanced dementia. Again, it's just a place where you can share your concerns or things you've noticed about the home. And through that conversation, if something comes up that several people notice the same thing, so everyone was talking about the fact that the sidewalks weren't shoveled and there's a lot of snow and it was a little dangerous getting in from the sidewalk or from the parking lot to come in and visit. If you all notice that, so I'd say like a couple people notice that concern, then you're able to bring that concern to the home saying, hey, the council noticed that when there's a big dump of snow, it's really dangerous for people to come in from the parking lot. The snow's not being cleared. Um, you know, as much as they need it to be. This is a health and safety concern. What can the home do to make sure that in the future, when we have really bad snow, it's a little bit safer for people coming in to visit, that they'll still be able to do that without worrying about falling. And then again, it just allows those families and friends to speak through a shared voice. I give the example of um, when you're a parent or when you're in a situation where you are with a bunch of children and they're all coming at you and you're in the kitchen and you're multitasking doing a bunch of other things and they're all asking you for 50 different things. It's very challenging to hear what each child needs. And they might be asking you for the same thing, but because you've got so many people talking to you, it's very overwhelming. And so the nice thing about councils, it allows families or friends to speak through a united voice, through one voice, who is that spokesperson who would relay that concern to staff. So that way, when they share that concern with staff, there's a better chance it's going to be heard because staff aren't being overwhelmed or distracted by all the other noise that's going on in the environment. They're able to focus on just what is being shared by that spokesperson. And then hopefully they'll respond to that spokesperson. That spokesperson can report back to the family council. So it's very streamlined communication. So that way you aren't playing broken telephone or you aren't going to have any misinformation shared. And misinformation is a very dangerous thing. Uh, so that streamlined communication is probably the best benefit of a family council, is that you can have that ongoing relationship with staff, have that spokesperson share the information, share the concern, and report back. When it comes to advocacy, so family councils are a great place for advocacy, not just within the home, and I'll talk about different levels, but the definition of advocacy is public support for an idea, plan, or way of doing something. And family councils are a great way to ensure that the voices of family members and friends are part of the ideas and plans and ways of doing something within the long-term care sector, whether it's the home, whether it's a neighborhood, or whether it's within the sector advocating for some of the changes that have happened. And again, it's really helpful in ensuring the voice of the person or group is heard in the decisions that impact their lives. So it's great when it comes to things tied to caregiver presence. It's good at ensuring that families and friends and caregivers' voices are heard. It's also important for helping the residents' voice be heard in making decisions. And again, it's a forum where families can use those collective voices to draw attention to the issues or needs. And advocacy minimizes the additional noise that exists within the environment. So again, you would focus on what is the most important concerns you have. What are your ideas? Collecting ideas about that proposed plan of doing something or procedures, and what works, what doesn't work, what would you change, what questions need to be clarified. Those are all ways that people can advocate and councils can advocate. So there's different levels of influence for family councils when it comes to their advocacy work. So you really want to think about the specific issue where you might want to engage in advocacy and think about, so at the biggest level, it's the government level. So that would be the provincial or federal systems and policies that govern long-term care or health care. So some examples of input for that were during the standards, I want to say the HSO standard consultation that were going on, that were put forward to provide national standards tied to long-term care sector across the country. That's an example of government advocacy. So that is the largest macro level of advocacy. That's looking at the system within Canada, but also the system within Ontario and how you could provide feedback or input. They do that quite regularly when it comes to the regulation update. So before Christmas, there is an update with the role of dietitians in long-term care, because dietitians don't work full-time in one home. They're a contractor. And so there is a change when it came to, do they need to physically live in that community to be the dietitian? So there's consultations about how people felt about that, as well as with dietitians about how that might be supportive of them in their role. So that's examples of government. So that's the biggest, broadest level you could possibly advocate. So the very big picture ideas. See. And then smallest is micro, and that would be your own long-term care home. So those would be tied to an issue that is happening in your home that is impacting the quality of life of a resident, of staff, or something that's impacting the experiences of caregivers. So I'll share some examples. So again, family councils can engage in letter writing campaigns. And again, this is advocacy that happens at that governmental level. So this is writing letters to the Minister of Long-Term Care, the Minister of Housing, the Minister of Seniors, the Ministers of Health in Ontario, or the Canadian Minister of Seniors. And again, just trying to draw attention to the issue you have within long-term care. I will say the Champlain region does have advocacy work, and they do a great job at writing letters. So if you want to learn more, I'm sure you've been there. But if you haven't, I highly encourage you. They have some very strong advocacy at that government level. Count again, networks. So, family council networks can be that collective of family councils who get together within a specific region who want to unite their voices and engage in advocacy for that specific area, whether it's at the government level, whether it's at the regional level, or whether it's supporting a specific home that the council just needs a little bit more support in working with that home to see changes they'd like to see happen, implemented, or get their ideas to be heard in that home. One example of a micro level of advocacy is a family council wanted to implement a bus stop and had a bus stop installed at the front entrance of their long term care home. So the council discussed it, that it was an issue that kept coming up because they were concerned about the challenges to access long-term care if people were using public transit. And this was not just family friends who were coming to visit. This was also for staff who relied on public transit to get to and from work. Especially in the winter when snow could make things a little bit more unsafe, the distance someone would have to travel to get to the long-term care home, they really thought it was a barrier. So, this discussion led to an interest in advocating to get a bus stop installed in front of their home near the main entrance of that long term care home community. So, once the council discussed that this was the issue, they wanted a bus stop for people to be able to get to the home safely. They approached the administrator and staff and said, "This is something that's important to us. This is why. How can we get your support and get on board and use our unified voice to advocate and approach the town and to be able to get this bus stop installed?" So once they got the approval of the administrator and staff, and everyone was involved in writing letters and knew who to contact and decided who was going to be the person reaching out, they reached out to the local municipal government, specifically the Department of Transportation, and made their request. So they did, and they were successful in getting that bus stop installed. But that's a very good example of family councils noticing a change they wanted to see happen that would benefit their specific long term care home community, because it meant that it would be easier for staff to get to and from work and safer for them to get to and from work, but also benefit residents because people who would want to come visit them could now come visit them without needing to worry about how they were going to get to and from that home. Another good example, and this one is very much tied to culture change, specifically person-centered language. And it was a home, I want to say it was in Ottawa. So what happened was this long-term care home was going through an experience where the clinical staff, and I want to say it was behavioral supports team, were doing an assessment for people with dementia and wanted the family council's feedback on the language used in the tool. And the family council felt that it was very clinical language and not person-centered language. And so as a group, they decided they would like to have the person-centered language working group have a presentation come in to one of their council meetings. So they learn more about person-centered language and what they could do as a council to implement person-centered language, because they wanted to be informed when they went to the home and had the conversation about, can we make this tool a little bit more person centered? Can the language be tweaked to this or that? And have a little bit more reasoning behind why they wanted to see those changes happening. And so they had a guest speaker come in and provide a presentation, helped provide them with some guidance when it came to what they could do to engage with the home in the conversation. And they also did take the person centered language pledge together as a council. And they are now advocates for person centered language within their home, when they're interacting with staff, when they're interacting with other families, within their own family council. They're trying to really embrace using person centered language within the long-term care home community. So that's another really good example. So the link for the blog is there. It's the Carlton Lodge Family Council who took the person-centered language pledge. Now I'm going to hand it over to Liane.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Another great resource to help support family members and staff working in long-term care is Deborah Batke, who's the author of Now What? Deborah is one of our great community partners, and we've done a lot of work with her, and we also highlight her in our move-in resource. Her lived experience of working in long-term care system, as well as being a caregiver to many family members, prompted her to write about the emotional journey of moving a loved one into long-term care. Her take on changing the narrative and shifting the admission focus from being transactional to a more collaborative relationship, as well as helping families work through the new identity as a family member of a resident in a long-term care home. She provides insight, encouragement, and tools to help caregivers to navigate through the sea of emotions that a caregiver goes through on that move-in day. She talks about knowledge gap and admission anxiety felt not only by the caregivers, but the staff as well. This has prompted staff to kind of shift their focus and shift the culture change in re-examining their admission processes. She offers different perspectives and tools on how to close that knowledge gap, build trust, and help make that move-in day a better experience for all involved. Next slide, Kat. I'm hoping most of you have seen our move-in guide. It's something we're very proud of. And we did a lot of pre-initial work before we put this guide together. And we really realized in talking to caregivers and having focus groups and surveys, the need for this resources, the great need, and the ongoing support that the caregivers and the residents of the long-term care home need. There's so many, we heard so many heartbreaking stories and different situations that families went through during the move-in process. And our goal in developing this guide, which we'll talk about in a few other slides later on in the presentation, was really to help family caregivers, family members, and residents be very well prepared when it comes to making those decisions and working through that move-in process. For those of you who have gone through it, I'm sure you know it's not easy. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of different silos, overload of information, and a lot of different personal experiences that hinder on how we're accepting and how that move-in day is going to look like. Here are some quotes that we heard from family members when we did our focus groups and our surveys, and they're very impactful. Someone said, "I knew nothing about long-term care prior to my family member moving into long-term care." Someone else said, "It's the administration and the core management team that set the attitude to make sure there isn't an us versus them in terms of family members being the problem and creating barriers versus where you can have great collaboration." Family members are kind of sitting ducks in terms of lack of knowledge and information going in. Nobody tells you that ahead of time, so you don't have that kind of information to help you make choices or even feel a little bit confident that you're doing the right thing and you're working towards a good decision. Without a solid admission process that educates and creates a relationship with the caregiver, we feel lost, alone, afraid, and unable to deal with our grief. This manifests in the unnecessary attitude of us versus them. So the feedback was very critical in helping us when we started building on our move-in process to help address the knowledge gap of the residents and families when they were joining the long-term care communities. So our guide is a great tool to help them better understand the long-term care processes, to help bridge the gap. And that knowledge really is key in helping increase family engagement in the community. So this guide has become the pride and joy of Family Councils Ontario, and it was truly a labor of love. And so much thought and effort went into the project to ensure that caregivers can have all the answers to their questions and be better prepared when they navigate the long-term care system. By being well prepared, it's a great tool that will help you feel empowered to ask questions and make informed decisions, as well as enabling caregivers to be an integral part of the team for their loved one. Now, being in the know helps, but there's still an emotional piece. To help people see that they are not alone, I decided to share the details of my journey in the guide by sharing my experience of moving my dad into a long-term care home. My hope is that caregivers will be aware of that deep emotional impact and to find ways for self-care, peer support, and for staff to provide comfort, empathy, and understanding. So here's my dad. And by sharing the story, I hope when we think about person-centered care that we think of all people in the long-term care community, including caregivers, and that staff can really also focus on caregiver-centered care as really helping support the caregiver during that move-in process. So this is my dad, and he was everything to me. And we had a really close relationship, and he taught me so many valuable life lessons. My dad was fun-loving, gentle, and a soft-spoken man. He loved music and movies. He was a musician, and he played in a band for about 25 years. He was also an accountant and was a genius in math, and his family was very important to him. When my dad got sick and was diagnosed with dementia, it was devastating to our family. Having the experience of supporting residents with dementia and seeing the progression on a daily basis, it made me sad and scared for my dad's future. I had to use my skills and training to communicate with my dad and also teach my mom and family how to better communicate and respond to my dad as his dementia progressed. The day came when my mom could no longer look after him safely at home, and we had to make the very difficult decision of moving my dad to a long-term care home. This day, I will never forget. It was a pivotal moment in both my personal and professional life. As we drove my dad to his new home, my heart was racing, my mind was full of uncertainty and fear. I was caught off guard by these emotions because, after all, this is what I did for a living as a resident family services coordinator. That was my job. I welcomed new families and residents into the home on a weekly basis. But this was really different because this was my dad. This was my family. And now I was becoming a family member of a long-term care home. That was an extreme reality check for me. My dad's move-in day was filled with the also familiar paperwork, sharing information, meeting new staff. And I remember standing in my dad's room watching him putter and fidget, and he was so confused and lost. And I can hear my mom crying in the background. She was not registering at all what was happening. And there were many staff that came into my dad's room to introduce themselves. And I saw them, and I knew they were talking to me, but I couldn't tell you one word that they said to me. I was so overwhelmed and lost. And I know that I signed many forms that day, and I knew those forms like the back of my hand, but I had no clue what I was signing that day. My mom and I left my dad in his new home, in his shared room, and we told him that the doctor wanted him to stay because they needed to do some tests. And he couldn't understand why he couldn't leave with us. And at that moment, my two worlds collided. When I was a resident family services coordinator who was responsible for the move-in process at the home that I worked in. But on this day, I was a daughter, and the emotion of it all was so overwhelming that I felt completely lost. I literally sat in my car for half an hour and cried. I couldn't even drive. I needed to get back to the home where I worked in and continue my day of supporting residents and families and staff. Once I gained some composure, I vowed in that moment that I would do things differently. I would engage and respond and show empathy differently. Although I often spoke the words, I never knew the impact, the deep emotional impact of moving a loved one into long-term care. And that emotion is real. It is raw and it is real. And it's funny because I often told my colleagues that I didn't want to be one of those family members. And if you read Deborah Backe's book, she talks about the flavors of different family members, the different flavors of families. And I knew the sector and I was educated and skilled, but let me tell you, there were times that I was that spicy jalapeno family member, and I totally got it, why I was. I was so overwhelmed, tired, stressed, sad. I was grieving that my response to certain situations was not ideal. I can guarantee you that there were times when staff scattered when they saw me coming. And I'm not a malicious person, but I often caught myself slipping because, after all, this was my dad and I loved him beyond words. Many times I needed to step back and take a deep breath and reflect on the situation at hand. I needed to problem solve and have a conversation with the nurse on how my dad's care plan could be adjusted to ensure that his particular needs were being met. It was important, and I needed to put trust in the staff that they were looking after my dad and that they were doing everything they could to care for him. But watching him deteriorate was heartbreaking, and I didn't always know how to cope. The good days, however, were to be celebrated. My dad had some great moments and days of clarity. He loved to joke with staff, play his air guitar, and sing some Elvis tunes. He would tip his hat and greet people as he walked in the corridor. That was my real dad. Going through the ups and downs of being a caregiver to a loved one in long-term care has really helped me put things into perspective. And that shared lived experience helped me completely understand what families go through on that move-in day. And families need so much support, empathy, guidance, and understanding. And that's why that caregiver centers care is so important. So that as caregivers, we can continue to support our loved one as best as we can and be really an effective team member of the long-term care community so that we can be the best that we can be to have those healthy relationships. Next slide, Kat. So how to use the guide. So we, as a team, we created this guide to be user-friendly and effective. And our goal really was to ensure that every question that a caregiver had would be answered. We separated the guide into sections so that even before long-term care is even a thought, of starting to have these conversations with your loved one about possibilities, what their wishes are, and possibilities of moving into long-term care. We provide you with numbers and organizations to help support you through the emotional journey. We provide you with information on the Ontario Caregiver Organization and family councils, numbers for Ontario Health at Home. And we explain in detail the journey of when you make that first phone call or that referral with Ontario Health at Home and what that's going to look like. We also paint a picture of what that move-in days is going to look like based on, general admission day for people in long-term care. And we kind of map it out for you so that there's no unexpected surprises. And we also provide guidance and resources and information to help you after that move-in day, what life will look like in the long-term care home and how you can best support your person in the new long-term care home and in the new long-term care community, how to have conversations with staff, with your loved one, with other family members when it comes to making decisions for your person in long-term care. We also provided a list of amazing resources to help support you in terms of any challenges you may be facing as a caregiver, and different organizations and resources to help you with all of that information and paperwork when it comes to financials, when it comes to making, developing a power of attorney or substitute decision maker, all the language that you're going to hear when it comes time to being part of a long-term care community. So based on feedback that we heard, we really took it to heart to ensure that every possible thing you need to know is in this guide. Now, we've also heard feedback since putting out the guide, and we're very grateful for Ontario Caregiver Organization for launching our guide for us in October. And it is so full of information in our guide, and we have had feedback that maybe we can provide little booklets and certain sections of the guide. And this is phase 1, and we're also looking at producing a guide for staff so that they can have all the tools and resources and really understand that caregiver perspective and how to best support the caregiver and the resident on that move-in day. So that is our next step in developing the guide. And we have a lot of work, a lot of great things happening at Family Councils Ontario that's really pushing us to change the narrative and shift the focus as well, and shift the culture. If we can change the slide, Kat. So one of the things we're working on is we're working on changing certain language that we use at Family Councils Ontario. And we're working on a big project right now in redeveloping our intended impact statement, our mission, and really looking at the outcomes of our work and how we can best support people in long-term care so that residents have the best quality of life and lived experience in their long-term care home. So we do have 2 questions that we'd like to ask of you this afternoon, and we really appreciate your input and your feedback. So I encourage you to either put your answers in the chat, or if someone would like to raise their hand and unmute. This is really important work that we're doing, and your feedback is really crucial in helping us, redevelop the language and our intended impact of our work. And we want to make sure that the language that we're using resonates with family caregivers and people in the long-term care communities. So the first question we have is, what 2 or 3 characteristics come to mind when you think of an effective family council? So if we ask you, what does an effective family council mean? Can you share with us 2 or 3 things, characteristics that come to mind if we were to ask you that question? So if you can please put your answers in the chat, or raise your hand and unmute and share those with us. So we can give everyone a few minutes. If anybody has anything they'd like to share, again, we really appreciate, and it really will help us in developing this work, because our focus is to shift the culture and kind of change the narrative a little bit, and the language that we use at Family Council Ontario.
I am seeing someone did put in the chat, clear communication with administration and clear communication with the staff. Absolutely. That's really important to an effective council.
Thank you for that. Structured yet open questions, collaborative. Hearing the voice and concerns from families. Excellent. That is very helpful. Michelle, if there's a way that we can have a copy of those answers in the chat, that'd be wonderful. All right, that's very helpful. So we got some great answers there. If we can move on to the second question, and then we'll have an opportunity to open the floor for Q&A. So we see some people putting things in the chat, so Kathleen and I will go over those as well. So thank you. Being open-minded, that's a good one. Question number 2, what does the term champion mean to you? So champion is a word that we're looking at because us as team members of Family Councils Ontario, we can't physically be in all the homes in Ontario. There's like over 640 plus homes in long-term in Ontario. So our hope is that we can create champions within the long-term care communities to support the family councils and to really be the driving force in shifting the culture and really making sure that their voices are being heard and fostering those healthy relationships with administration and the staff at the long-term care community. So if anyone can share what they think the term champion means to them, and if champion is a good word that we can use in terms of willing to advocate, knowledgeable on where to find information, connected. Excellent. A leader, which doesn't mean necessarily a manager, but a person that's able to lead and help foster growth for those around them. Awesome. And that's kind of like where we were going with the term. So I love that feedback. Very much appreciated. So we did have another comment in the chat, and Michelle just responded to it. So your mom had been in the long-term care home for almost a year and didn't learn much about family council until a notice in an elevator for a meeting that was canceled. So that's very unfortunate that you had that experience. And that's part of creating these champions within the home, is that champion will keep making sure that family councils are visible within the long-term care home. And they will have opportunities to meet and greet and welcome new family members within the home so that they can highlight, their work and what they're all about, and also be that peer-to-peer support for new family member and offering that caregiver-centered care that I was talking about earlier. And these champions will ensure that their collective voices are heard, that they're visible within the home, that there will be opportunities to meet new family members that come into the home, and that those new family members are aware of the existence of the family council. So that's really important. For the first question, a good functioning family council will have family members attending, extend the invitation to new families to participate. Absolutely. That's very important as well. I love the feedback. Thank you so much. And it's really going to help us in pushing through with this intended impact statement and really working on making sure that the outcomes of our work is reflective of what we're putting out there. So the resources and the education that we're putting out there and what we want to do to really help improve quality of life and experiences for everyone in the long-term care home.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, keep your eyes posted. If you are not subscribed to our e-bulletin, please do. We're going to be putting out a wider call to a number of partners and voices within the long-term care sector, and getting more detailed feedback than just these 2 questions in a brief survey that shouldn't take more than 15 minutes for people to complete. But again, it will have more questions about what we're trying to do with our impact statement, just to try and, again, get some feedback, get some ideas to help really make sure that what we are doing, whether it's creating some type of tool to evaluate family council effectiveness that we would then use as an organization, we really want to get as much input and feedback as possible to help us guide those decisions and those steps. So thank you for sharing, and just, again, keep your eyes posted. We will be putting a survey out as well to get more feedback. So we did get some questions in advance, and I'm going to share those with you, and Liane and I will answer them. So the first question was just talking about strategies to establish and maintain relationships with caregivers and long-term care staff, especially in the era where there might be a lot of staff turnover, or there might be heightened presence of agency staff. So it really does make it challenging for caregivers to be able to build those relationships and really be a strong partner in care with the staff working in the home. And so this image, the two images. So one is actually an All About Me poster, and it was created through a regional geriatric program. I don't know which one created it, but I really do like it because that's one very good example of a strategy that a family council, or even just as a caregiver, you could advocate to have implemented in your home. So it's a poster that's created that you would put. To me, ideally, the best place to put it would be at the head of the bed, close to where the resident is, so it can be used to guide conversations between the caregiver who's providing that direct care, specifically if they're helping with toileting or getting them dressed, putting them in bed. So that way they have information about that person to help guide how you would provide that care without needing to rely on going and reading the care plan and having it memorized for the however many residents they're supporting. So putting this up in the room, and I say in the room because privacy, right? So if it's outside the room in the hall, yes, everyone learns, but not everyone needs to know some of the information that you might be wanting to share. And so you could post that by the resident's bed, and it would tell details about them. So things about what they did as a profession, who's important to them. So who are the people who are going to be coming and asking questions about them? So that way they know the name. When you go to ask a question about that person, they will have read, oh yeah, I read that name, or, they would have a little bit more comfort and responding and acknowledging that question. What's important to that resident? So those are things that family councils or caregivers have advocated to have implemented in their home that work quite well. The other thing I will say is that picture of the different bubbles is, as Deborah Bakhti calls it, read her book and learn about the different family flavors. And unfortunately, you can't control everything in long term care. Things change all the time. You can't control the regulations because you are not the person who's making them. You can't control the policies because you are not the administrator. And sometimes even the administrator can't control what's going on because they are told by public health or they're told by the regulations what they need to do. And so the only thing you can control in long-term care as a caregiver is how you are present. So really think about your presence. And do you want to be that jalapeno all the time? You don't always need to be, very um abrasive and confrontational, right? Because it's really challenging to build a relationship with someone when you're always scared of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing around them. So really be mindful of your presence. And yes, you can be that jalapeno when you need to. If you have a situation where, this is wrong, because you have a demonstrated history in your role as a caregiver, feel free to be that jalapeno to advocate for that specific change because you know that is what that person needs because you've done that before and it's resolved that situation. But also be mindful of trying to build a relationship. You are part of a team, you want to collaborate. So, how can you be approachable? How can you work together? How can you build relationships? And that really is starting with how you are in that moment. And if you notice today you're just off, you're just tired, you're exhausted, you're sick, whatever. If you're not feeling yourself, be aware of that and know maybe today's not the day to have that conversation. Let's take note of that issue. And then the next time you are in that mindset where you can have the conversation then. You don't always have to have the conversation the day of in the moment because that's when things can go wrong. Liane, I'll let you answer.
Yes, and that's very reflective of that. And just based on my personal experience is don't be afraid to have those conversations with your home staff. Be vulnerable and really share what you're feeling. So the times that I was spicy and had jalapeno moments, I knew it's because I was stressed and I was tired and I saw what was happening and it was very hard to process. And having the experience of working in long-term care, I also knew that certain things and approaches with the staff were not helping my dad in terms of responding. And so I would get a little upset about it, but to have those honest conversations and show your vulnerability and share your feelings, I think is a great way and a great strategy to really build those relationships, because a staff can't assume what you're feeling and what you're going through, and with a certain situation. And there always is a root cause. There's an underlying meaning of why we respond to certain things and how we respond to certain things. And like I said, I'm not a malicious person, but when I was reactive like that, it's because I was stressed and tired. And I was also, caregiver to a daughter who had, challenges. And I had a young family at the time, and there was just my mom had to sell the family home. So there was so much in the background going on that the staff didn't know. But it's important that I shared that with them so that they understood how I was feeling and how I was reacting. And that really helps foster a really healthy relationship, because there is that understanding and that knowledge, and you really build trust in having those conversations. Now, the same goes for the staff in the home. No one's perfect, and there will be challenges and there will be mistakes made. Now, from the home side, to build those healthy relationships and to really build trust, they need to own up to their mistakes and say, yeah, we kind of failed at this. We let this fall off the wayside. We didn't do this correctly, but here's the plan moving forward on how we're going to fix this, and we're going to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And have those conversations with your family members and let them be part of the solutions that you're discussing and moving forward when there has been a mistake made or concerns and complaints coming through. Have your family members be part of those conversations and the solutions. And that really helps build a good relationship as well.
Okay, so the next question was asking how you can attract more members to join your family council. And one thing I would say is try to think about how you can celebrate what your council's doing and the presence of your council in your home. So, talking to the home about, can we write a little bit of a little something about this event we did or this initiative we did, and share it in the newsletter for the home. Most homes have a resident council board. A lot of the homes I've gone to visit, I actually take pictures because I'm so excited to see it. You can request to have a board to post information about your family council. And so I've gone into homes and I've seen their family council board. It's kind of in a main entrance, very visible when you go into a common area. And whenever I see it, I take a picture because it excites me to see them so much. So it's, again, just showing that that home has a council, that they view family engagement as something that's important, that they find a bulletin board and they give them space, and that is space the family council can use to try and increase their visibility. It's up to them to decide what they want to do with that space. Many councils will select someone or some volunteers from their council to take on the role of being the person who, takes care of that board, who will update it, who will make it colorful and make it attractive. And it's a really good way to boost visibility of your council in the home. If your home doesn't have bulletin boards but has TVs throughout the home, we've also had a council make a slide, like a PowerPoint slide, that they could include on the TVs display. They just ask the home, we've made a slide, can you please add it to the display, to try and celebrate and increase visibility of our family council within that home. So again, you've got the old school hard copy bulletin board, very effective. Some places will do TV screens, which again are posted throughout the home because sometimes it's challenging with outbreaks to get from one area to another. So with digital screens everywhere, it's posted in all the neighborhoods and all the common areas so people can see and again celebrate. If there's a community event happening in your home, asking, can we have a table and can we do something? So this is a spring gathering. So the family council had brochures they made and they were doing face painting and tattoos and they had candy and they're doing something to build relationships with residents and families in the home. And then one other thing I'd say is, I know that there was a council that did this before COVID, and it's actually in our Family Council Ontario video. When we talk about the importance of councils, the council in it are wearing Ask Me About Family Council buttons. So family councils will make a button or have a badge or something, a sticker even, that family council members can wear when they are present in the home as a caregiver, but it also indicates that people can approach them and ask them about family council and learn a little bit more. So it's a way to recruit in the smaller areas of the home, where someone might be known as a caregiver and has relationships with the other caregivers. It creates that conversation they can have with the staff about what's the benefit of the family council. Can you tell me about family council? With the residents, tell me what family council does and how is it different from residents council? What have you been talking about? And then again, with those other caregivers. Liane, I'll say you might have some other ideas of what your councils have done.
Yeah, I just want to add, being part of that moving process. So having your family council members welcome new family members into the home and working with the home administration on how to make that happen. So we have permission to contact forms where a family member can sign if they give permission to the home to share their contact information with the family council. Family council would welcome that new family member and ask them if they have any questions and be available for that peer-to-peer support. And I'm going to circle back to the, to that caregivers centered care and having someone that already had that lived experience of moving their loved one into long-term care home and asking them, we know this is an overwhelming day. How are you feeling? Are you okay? Do you need anything? Can we, do you have any questions that we can help answer? And that also can help increase your membership because then you're welcoming a new family member, you're telling them about your council. As Kathleen said, you can share information, you can highlight some of the work that you've done and celebrate some of the achievements. And now that new family member may want to do that for another new person moving in and being that peer-to-peer support. So I think being part of the move-in process is very important for family council.
Okay, so the next question was, how do we have any influence on changes that still need to happen in long-term care homes? And again, that goes back to when I was talking about advocacy. And I think the easiest place to start is you want things to happen in your home is get to know each other. So become familiar with the resident council and what the resident council is talking about in your home. Even when it comes to family council issues, I always say with family council, make sure you talk to the residents council before you really escalate an issue, especially if it's something that is primarily of importance to residents. So anything tied to meals and what they're eating, because it's their needs, not your needs as caregivers, right? Like, yes, you might want them to have healthy, fresh fruit and vegetables, but again, at their age, maybe it's more important that they're just wanting to eat what they're being given, right? So make sure if you as a family council decide that you're worried about the quality of the food and what's being offered, you talk to the residents council and say, we're worried about this. Is this a concern that is important to you? Or do you bring it to the attention of the home? Can we also bring it to the attention of the home? And sometimes they might say, yes, please go forward. But sometimes they might say no. If they are not upset about the food, then unless it's like the proportion of food that's given to guests at meals of residents, so looking at what you would get as a family caregiver and you are coming to join for a holiday meal, it's not going to impact you. So if it's not important to the residents at that point in time, as a council, that's where it kind of ends. You just would check in with them 6 months later and see how they feel about that issue and ask the residents how you can support them in advocating for things that they are working on. So always go back to those residents, but build relationships with the resident council. Get to know the staff, specifically the frontline staff, looking at what are the issues that they're encountering with their work, with their day-to-day life. Earlier on, I had a picture during the pandemic. PPE shortages was definitely an issue for frontline staff, right? Thinking about their health and safety. And so what a family council member did is that he was concerned about that. He saw that impacting what was going on in his home. So he went to his own personal network and advocated to secure PPE that could be delivered to long-term care homes in his specific region. And so again, just looking at what's happening with the frontline staff, building a relationship with them, talking to them, seeing what's going on. I gave the example, or one example I came across is I was in a long-term care home, and the family council had the environmental services manager coming in and giving an update. And they asked the environmental services manager questions about why was there laminate flooring in certain neighborhoods of the home, but in another one, it was carpeting. And they were concerned about the carpeting because it was an area where there was residents who were highly incontinent, who were soiling the carpet, and the quality of the environment was lacking because as much as they clean that carpet, it's really hard to get certain smells out of fabric. And so they felt that the quality of life for residents, for staff, for caregivers was suffering because of the smell, and they wanted to have laminate flooring throughout the entire home. And so my advice to them was, okay, you've just identified this issue where who else would be concerned about it? The residents, because it's impacting their quality of life where they're living. So talk to the residents, ask them how they're feeling. And then with the staff, because it's going to impact their quality of life where they're working. How do they feel about working in an environment where they're smelling that all day? Talk to each other, create a solid plan of this is our need, this is the issue, how are you going to communicate it? And then make sure that when you're speaking with the home about that issue, you're all doing one, you're all going to talk about the same issue, and you're all going to use the same messaging with the home when you're using the issue. So looking at that network that you have of who else is invested in that specific issue, what is their perspective? Like, what are their specific issues? How do their needs align with your needs or your desires? And then using that collective voice to advocate through that same messaging to that home to hopefully have that change happen. I think if you look at those people who can support your voice and build up the voice of the council and get those allies and those peers and those other groups also advocating for the same thing, it's very easy to kind of overlook one voice wanting something. But when it's multiple voices all going back and saying, this is what our issue is, this is what we want to see happen, then it's amplified. And I think that is the power of a family council, is that you have this collective voice of families where you can approach these other partners in your home and talk about, here's something we see as could be more efficient or could be improved. Here's a change we'd like to see happen. How do you feel about this change? What could we do to, and all getting on the same page? Liane?
Yeah, I'm going to add that I think collaboration is the best influence on change. And I want to reflect back to a comment in the chat that as a family council chair, you're the focal point of family members to raise concerns, and that could maybe lead to jalapeno moments. In terms of promoting change, yes, we're going to hear collective concerns from family council members and family members in a long-term care home. But if all we do is push concerns and complaints, change will not happen. So as a collective group, it takes collaboration with the home staff, but it also takes coming forward with possible solutions and recommendations. So when there is change that needs to happen within the home, as a collective voice of a family council, you write about that change and what you're seeing and what family members are feeling and what you're hearing from other family members. So make sure that voices are being heard, but also put forward the recommendations. Like, how can the council support the home in making these changes? So by sharing possible solutions and having some recommendations will really help build that collaboration and to have those conversations with the home on what's manageable, what's realistic, how can we make this happen? And by working together is how you're going to make change happen. So to me, I think that is the biggest factor, because if not everyone's on board and not everyone's working together, you're never going to see change. It's only going to be complaints, and there will never be a positive outcome or change that'll happen. So working together, collaborating, and not only pushing through concerns and complaints, but coming up with possible solutions and recommendations and working together to make those changes happen.
And I will say it's about building relationships too. So really taking time not just to always be talking about when there's a problem, but get together, have socials, have joint events, do things where you are comfortable talking to each other. So it's not just when there's an issue that you all of a sudden have to figure out how to collaborate. Like always be thinking about how can you build relationships? How can you get to know each other? How can you talk to each other? So that way, when those things do come up, it's a little bit easier to understand uh, what everyone else needs to feel included and to feel their voices being heard in that situation. All right. So this is a question that was asked. How do we see person-centered care fitting with resident preferences for same gender personal care workers? So basically, how can is it appropriate if you know that that person wants that specific gender to advocate for it even though you want person-centered care? And I think that there's a couple places where it's just natural to have those conversations about people's preferences. So obviously we talked about the move-in process. That is a question that will be asked. You'll also get asked those questions as part of the care plan, the quarterly care plan or annual care plan review. So again, that's your chance where you as a caregiver are part of the team, you're part of the conversation. So if you know something about that person's preferences because of culture, so if you come from a culture where it's inappropriate for any man that is not that person's husband to see a female naked, and that would create challenges when a personal care support worker is male and providing them a bath, make sure you're communicating that with the home and emphasizing that why is it important. So again, it's perfectly appropriate to request that if there's a specific reason for that need. Again, you don't know what trauma or you know what trauma someone might have. So they might have been abused or in a situation that wasn't where there's some type of abuse that they experienced and could be triggered in those personal care situations. And so you're advocating for them, but it's also for the safety of staff. So when you think about behaviors, there's always that antecedent, the behavior, and then the consequence. I've been on the consequence side of something where I was punched in the face by someone and it really impacted me in the day. Now, I didn't leave with a black eye or anything, but it did impact how safe I felt in certain environments providing care to that person. And so it's absolutely appropriate for you to make those requests when you know it's both for the safety of the person to prevent them from having those traumatic memories triggered as well as the staff. So for their safety, so they don't get that responsive behavior happening in that environment, to let them know. And there's a number of ways that they could also communicate that. So it would be in the care plan. And Michelle, when we were prepping for this, shared, I think there was a home that she was in where there's certain things that can help communicate in that resident's room when you'd be providing that personal care, like helping them get dressed and undressed or toileting about their preference. And it could just be having a pink figure cut out and again posted by that resident's bed in their room to help indicate this is a resident that will only and should only receive care delivered by female PSWs for a specific reason, or yellow meaning that anyone can support them. So there are ways that you can communicate that in both a visual way to help remind people, but it can be expressed and it's completely appropriate to request that within the care plan. Leanne?
Yeah, I have nothing to add, Kat. That's spot on. And that is something that we did at what you were just talking about in the home that I worked in, where we had it identified with the pink figure or the blue figure if there was consent or what was reflected in the care plan, if it was only female caregiver or they were okay with either male or female caregiver providing care. And it is a resident right. It's not just a preference, it is a right, because there could be some underlying traumatic experiences that can cause some negative triggers within a resident. And whatever the reasons are, the home has to do everything that they can to adhere to that request or that wish or that specific need. And it absolutely is fitting to do that.
And those are all wonderful questions. So thank you for submitting those in advance of the webinar and sharing them. And thank you to Rochelle and Michelle for sharing them with us so we could include them in the slides. So we did want to take the time to thank you for inviting us to speak. It's always a pleasure to have the chance to talk about a project that Leanne and I worked on for quite a while. And we do realize that it was a lot of information to share with you. So if you do have any questions or want to know more about anything that we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at Family Councils Ontario. As I said, in the next week or so, keep an eye out on our e-bulletin. We will have a survey coming out to get more feedback with our impact statement feedback. And also, we have the save the date out for our conference. It's going to be in person in June this year. The registration is going to open up the end of March, but there is an early bird registration. It's going to be happening in Hamilton. We'll have more details about the speakers coming up, but we're very excited that our conference is going to be in person in Hamilton this year. It's our 10-year anniversary of being I forgot what, being recognized as a Family Councils Ontario itself, not Family Councils Project, which we were before we became Family Councils Ontario. But we're very excited to be back in person and celebrating Family Council with some really exciting, innovative sessions. So we really do hope that you'll look at the website, ask us questions, and consider joining us in person. But if you don't want to join in person, there is also a virtual option to attending the conference. I'm going to stop my sharing and say if there's any other questions, we're happy to answer your questions.